let's just sew whatever. Hello everybody, today we are going to be making the Guardian bag at 75%. My friend wanted one that was a little bit smaller, so we made one as a test to see if it was the right size and that it could be done, and it can be done, and it's freaking adorable. If you thought I was done making Guardian videos, you were wrong. So let's get into it. Start off this very modified tiny little baby Guardian. I've added some foam and Decaville Heavy to the bottom, so I'm just going to kind of quilt around that to prevent it from shifting and just compress it a little bit. Just going to sew around with my foot up against the outside edge of the Decaville Heavy. And this will prevent any lifting over time as well, just in case. And then I'm pulling my threads up. And then I'll knot them off to the back. You can see that gives fun little puffiness to it. Okay, and then I'm going to add the bottom lining because this bag is finished off with binding, and I'm going to just baste all that together around the outermost edge, about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then we have the centers all marked out along the bottom so that we know where those quadrants meet. And then if there's any excess lining or anything like that, just kind of trim it all even so that attaching the bottom panel is much easier. But that is our bottom panel ready to go. You could even add little purse feet if you wanted. That'd be super cute. It's so baby, so itty bitty. So I'm going to set that aside. I'm not really following the pattern directions. I'm just kind of going off of the pile in front of me and memory of making the pattern so many times. So we've got the front, back, and we just need zipper tabs. There we go. So in order to get the measurement for the zipper, you want to multiply everything by 0.75. So since we printed the pattern out at 75%, that's how we get the measurement for what everything needs to be cut to. Just make sure you account for the width of your zipper. You're not multiplying that by 0.75, you're just doing the length. So for this zipper tab piece, if you had cut it to the 0.75, it wouldn't be wide enough to house your zipper tape. So make sure you take that into consideration. And then we're going to put right sides together for lining and exterior, sandwiching the zipper. And then I believe it is a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And just repeat that on the other side. I have cotton woven for my exterior, interfaced with a woven interfacing, and waterproof canvas for the lining, which is going to give it a lot of structure when it's all put together. We're going to open this up and top stitch through exterior and lining. So then the finished measurement of your zipper, again, you're going to multiply that by 0.75. What do I do? pretty good. Okay. And then I'm just folding my zipper in half and marking with a silver marking pen or heat erasing where the center is. I used to snip the center, but you really should not snip your zipper at all. Okay. So now that we have that done, we can start adding the zipper to the back panel. So I'm going to do that by adding tape all the way around here. I'll go ahead and snip the top center so we know where to add our zipper. So we'll start by lining up the center marking on our zipper and just slowly setting that in place. And I wouldn't recommend using a tape that's wider than 1/8 of an inch, or you might risk seeing it on the completed bag just because it's hard to get really close. All right. Mine's a little short on one side, so I'm going to just lift up and kind of repress and see if I can't get it to fit. So maybe this time I'll start at the bottom, lining up those 3 focal points, the top, center, and the bottom of our tabs, and then ease out the curve. And this is tricky on the regular size Guardian, so you can imagine it's even more tricky on the tiny one. So we're going to base this in place at about 1/8 of an inch and just go really slow around that curve, making sure that your zipper tape doesn't have any puckers or folds in it. And we're going to repeat that now, but with our lining smooshed over everything. And unzipping your zipper tape will help. Then you don't have the force of 2 lines of zipper teeth pushing up against that seam. And so line up that top center snip. And if you want to tape this together as well, you can. And then again, the other focal point is the bottom. And then we'll ease the rest of it in together. And pinching your zipper teeth down is very important. And you want to make sure you don't use materials that are too thick, or you won't be able to feel where your zipper teeth are as you're top stitching that area. I think the first time I made a Guardian, I really messed that up. So I'm able to feel through the layers, push the teeth out of the way. You can like see there where they're sitting. I'm just kind of wiggling it flat. I like to start with this front, or I should say this back pocket, because it is one of the trickier spots on the bag. And when you get it out of the way, you feel a lot better about the rest of it coming up. So I'm using my screwdriver as a stiletto to kind of help me push down my zipper teeth as well. However, it's harder to feel through the screwdriver where the zipper tape is, so I'm just going to use my finger. And I'm feeling my zipper tape kind of bunch back up, so I'm just reaching in and straightening it out and feeling from the outside that it's nice and flat before I continue. If you have to lift the foot up, just make sure your needle is down before you rearrange. And then if you feel like you need to add some snips into this little curved area, just make sure you're only trimming away your lining fabric or your exterior fabric. Do not cut your zipper. Yeah, if you want to add little like monster teeth, relief snips, you can do that to kind of imitate what a pinking shear would do. You can do that. All right, and then we're going to flip this and top stitch. You can try to iron and press that. Otherwise, I just kind of smoosh it. And then I'm pulling on the zipper as I top stitch around the top edge. I'm just making sure I'm separating it from that seam, making sure that I can feel my lining underneath is in the right area so that I don't miss top stitching it. And then you can sew down the bottom as well. Okay. So there's what that looks like so far. And then we've got our exterior and lining top half, and we're going to fold that in half to snip the center at the very top and then at the opening of that curve as well, so that we know where the center of our zipper is going to go. And I'm going to start by adding double-sided tape just at the top of the curve and on the sides at the bottom. Because taping this whole thing and trying to stick it in place is just a little bit too much. So definitely going to start with the top center of the zipper opening. Let me put right sides together. And then line up your other focal points, which are the bottom edges. And if you want there to be more zipper tape than tab, just make sure whatever you deduct from your zipper tab, you add to the zipper tape and you should be fine. Like if you wanted your bag to open a little bit wider. The tabs are so long so that stuff doesn't like fall out when you kind of open it, so. Okay. So I've got those lined up. And then I'm going to unzip the zipper. If you want to tape everything in place, you can. But what I've done in the past is I will start at the bottom. And we're just basting this in place right now because then we're going to add our lining. And I'm just lining up the zipper to the exterior fabric, sewing at 1/8 of an inch. And then I'll pull and straighten what's in front of me, just by a few inches at a time until I get around the curve. Okay. Make sure that your center marks stay lined up. And then try not to pull on your fabric too much, especially since I'm using just a cotton fabric. I could end up stretching it, and then things won't quite fit. So I had all that lined up, and then I'm gonna start lining this up. Okay, so we've got that basted into place. And now we're gonna add the lining side and add those same kind of tape registration lines. I think I tried once to tape the entire thing and sew both on at the same time to save time, make it go a little quicker, but it did not pay off in the end. Okay. And there is the center. And you're sandwiching the zipper with right sides together. Your yeah. Because we'll press this open. Okay, perfect. So your lining fabric should be touching when you lay the sides of that panel together. So the wrong side of my fabric is facing up, but the right sides of my lining are touching and the right sides of my exterior are touching. Means I'm doing it right. And hopefully so are you. And then it's up to you if you want to try and sew it from the lining side or if you would rather sew it with the exterior facing up so you can already see your basting stitch. But then we're going to try and sew this at a 3/8, a 1/4 inch to a 3/8, whatever you can handle. It'll be fine in the end as long as it's consistent. And now that waterproof canvas does not have stretch. So as I'm pulling this, I'm again just being careful, lining up the curve and making sure that my zipper tape doesn't have any puckers. So I'm pressing my fingers against it as I sew. I'm getting towards a little curved area, so I'm going to leave my needle in and straighten that area as best as I can, and then move on. And so don't get caught up on trying to get the entire thing to be lined up at once. Just line up what is in front of you by a little bit, and then get through that area, focus on the next. And then you've done it. And so this will turn right sides together. Again, if you want to try to snip away any of your fabric from that zipper, you can. And then I'm going to line up the top edges of the exterior and lining, putting wrong sides together now, lining up the center. And I'm only doing this so that I can top stitch. I'm not going to be sewing all of this together around the outside edges. We're just going to be top stitching around that zipper opening. And then the top stitching is the exact same way. Don't look at it all at once. Just kind of take it a little bit at a time. Leave your needle in as you readjust your fabric. Make sure you can feel that your lining is sitting underneath your exterior. And I am pulling like all of my layers apart as I do this. So I'm pushing my zipper tape out of the way. I'm pulling on those clipped corners. There we go. And you can zip it. See how it looks? It's so little. I'm working on the interior slip pocket so I can get the lining side completed. And I'm not going to sew the pocket as instructed. I just think it would be too bulky with the waterproof canvas. So I'm going to give it a finished edge for the front of the bottom. And then I'm going to just fold this down. So there's raw edge, that'll be on the lining side. And then I'll top stitch the top fold so that that is a nice looking edge. And then the raw edges, since it's waterproof canvas, won't fray. And I think they're gonna get caught in the seam allowance just barely anyway. So I'm not super concerned. Got that top stitched, and now I'm just kind of setting this in place about an inch or so above the bottom, and you can see how close it is to the edges. So it's really gonna be right at the seam allowance. I don't think it'll be an issue. And then back stitching within those corners quite a bit to make sure that it doesn't come loose over time. Okay. So now that that piece is ready, we can put our lining sides at the top, right sides together. And I'm going to sew that in place. Probably just going to use a 3/8 inch seam allowance. I think that might be her default anyway, but again, so long as you're consistent throughout, it shouldn't matter. And then I'm going to lay this flat and top stitch this open. It just helps reduce bulk later on. So there's what that looks like inside so far. And then I'm going to get our connectors and straps ready to go. And I'm using 3/4 inch hardware for this bag. Oh yeah, oh yeah. So if you're using a woven fabric, you'll double the measurement so there's no raw edge underneath, but if you're using vinyl, you would just cut it to half. So we'll cut it to 1.5. My bad. Otherwise it'll be way too thick. So I adjusted the width of that piece, but I kept the length from the original pattern, because you still need it to be just as long to secure it just in case. And then we'll top stitch all the way across this, and then we're going to cut it into 4 equal connectors. Now that we have that top stitched, I can cut all of that. And then we'll grab our D-rings. And we're going to cut these at an angle to attach them to the front panel. Well, the back panel, not the front. These are going to go about 1 inch up from the bottom, and you're only attaching it to your exterior fabric. I'm going to pull it in to the seam allowance a little bit. You can see, just like that. So then the other D-ring you'll cut at an angle, and it's just going to be in the opposite direction. So if your print is directional, make sure you're keeping that in mind. And then we're just going to base that in place. About an inch up from the bottom edge, only through the exterior. Okay. So now we're ready to kind of work on the front of our bag, which is going to get the I think this is where I add the straps, usually. You want to cut these at an angle as well. If your webbing is directional or you've added any accents, just make sure you're cutting in opposite directions. And I am using 1 inch wide webbing. 1.5 would be a bit overwhelming on the bag, I think. And I'm going to line these up about an inch from the side edge. And you want them to angle down and out to the side so when they go over the shoulder, they fit nicely. We're going to baste those to the top. I do have foam on the entire panel. If you're using a thicker fabric for the front, you can definitely eliminate the foam within the top and bottom seam allowances, but since I'm just using cotton woven, I do want the foam throughout the panel. And you want to sew over the straps a couple of times without sewing over the same place again and again. We're just kind of reinforcing, making sure we prevent as much fraying as possible. I have even added a little bit of vinyl to the end first. You could even maybe do some like interfacing. Just really want to keep it from fraying as much as possible. So there's that. We also have our little grab handle. I've cut mine to about 11 inches, but it might need to be a little bit shorter, but I can figure that out before I attach it, so I'm not too concerned. Mark out the bottom center, and then we're going to add our nameplate. And then this is technically the front of the bag. Not technically, but literally it is. So center that.
Did you put a no demons allowed?
No, not yet. I might do it when I put the binding on. I did not fuse the foam to the panel because foam does tend to wrinkle when you turn it. So as long as it's basted in place, you're still getting the support without the possibility of the wrinkles. There are some bags that I'll fuse the foam, but not always. All right. So now we can attach this to the exterior panel, lining up those centers. The only part of this bag that is finished off with binding is the bottom when you attach it. So you really have to be mindful of that when you're sewing all of this together. And then again, I'm using a 3/8 inch seam allowance along the top. Make sure that your lining is out of the way. And then I'm pressing the straps to the back. And I'm going to top stitch through the front panel with the bulk to the front. You won't really see that top stitch, but it really helps when you go to add your handle and everything. All right. And then something I do that is not part of the pattern is when I add my handle, I sew it a little differently. So I'm lining up that center seam. And then we're going to start working on our grab handle. So the width of the 3 inches. So I'm going to find the center of my grab handle, and then I'm going to measure 3 inches out because we're going to be folding this in half. Within that area. So that our handle has a little 3D effect. It's almost like a rolled handle. So we're folding that in half from line to line. One line there, one line there. And we're just going to top stitch that. Is that right? Or is it folded on itself there? Maybe it's folded on itself. Okay, yeah, she folds it into the center, that's right. So kind of like you make your D-ring connectors, you're going to be folding the long edges into the center, which is a little harder because this is only 1 inch. But that's okay. We can do it. Okay. So I've got one side folded in half from line to line. I'm going across the mark we made and then folding the other side under. And you're not going to see this, so if it doesn't look great, that's okay. We're going to cover it up. We'll add some concealer. It's okay. This wraps around the strap. And then we'll top stitch around that. And this time we'll make the top stitch look pretty. So I'm just going to kind of lay this in the center. It will puff up a bit when you top stitch it, and that's good. So I'm going to leave about 1/2 inch hanging off into my seam allowance, and I'm centering this between the front and back panel. So yeah, that looks good. Kind of see there. And then when we top stitch this on, the way I like to do it is essentially we're just gonna make a box stitch starting from the edge of the back strap to the other edge of the back strap. And I am sewing through my lining and my exterior fabrics, but not along the outermost edge, or we're not going to be able to get them to separate. And then if you want to add a stitch across, it does look nice. If you want to do a box stitch, you can do that. Just pulling that thread to the back. And then repeat that on the other side. So there is what it's looking like so far. So now I'm going to get all of my side panels prepped, and then we're ready for the other difficult part, which is adding the side panels. You need a lot of patience for it, maybe a cookie, but you can do it. I'm going to work on the hidden strap connectors on the side. I'm using a strap connector tool from Jolili Creations. I'm going to measure 1.5 inches down and centered on the side panel. And then from there, I'm going to create this little trapezoidal cutout. And we're only going to be cutting the top edge. 1, 2, 3. Don't cut out the entire box, or you'll just have a hole in your project. You'd be kind of sad. Okay. So up, over, down, do not cut across. we're going to slide this up through the back so that you can see the connection of the fold line of your connector. And you want about 1 inch underneath. And we're going to top stitch above the flap, not on it, right above it. So you're only sewing through your D-ring connector and your side panel. Again, make sure your fold line is facing up, otherwise you've got it backwards. And now we'll take our D-ring and we're going to slide that through, and then when we push the other side down, it'll push the flap underneath as well. And then we're going to grab the flap and our D-ring connector and sew through that. And basically sewing across the line that we traced out when we started. And then we'll add a rivet, or you can sew right underneath that as well. But we'll push that through, and it pushes the flap down. And then you'll pinch all of that together and sew on the line that we traced but did not cut. And then that little connector tool, the hidden strap template, has a little area to center your rivet as well. So you lay that up against here, center out the stitch lines, and then you know exactly where to rivet on both sides. Now we are going to work on the side pockets. Just going to fold that in half and top stitch across the top. If you had not enough fabric to create these, you could also fold your pattern piece in half and add 1/2 inch or whatever seam allowance you prefer to the top edge so that you could put right sides together and then sew across the top. And then we'll line up the bottom unsewn edge and sew across that. Top stitched top. Okay, and then you're just gonna fold the piece a little bit. It's creating an angled pocket, a little 3D pocket. So I'm starting in the bottom corner, and then I'm just lifting and pulling on the pocket to line up the side edge of the side panel and the side edge of the pocket. And then we'll repeat that on the other side. I thought that's what I heard. And then our side panels are done. We can trim away our threads. Cute little side pockets. So now our exterior side pockets are done. Our lining side pockets don't have anything going on. and our exterior is ready for them. If you want to, before you continue on, you can create your strap, your grab handle. It is optional, and if you're not adding that grab handle, you don't need the side connectors on that panel. One thing to note is for these connectors, the pattern piece, when you scale it down, is too small for 1-inch hardware. It kind of creates an odd size, so you just want to make sure that you trim that down to work for 1-inch hardware. The connector that I traced out is actually 1.5-inch wide and 1 inch at the bottom. So you could potentially use 1.5-inch webbing still with it. But I think that's kind of fun and cute. So I'm just going to tape this together for now. You could even edge coat this piece if you wanted. Then we'll sew all that on. Now comes the really fun part that's hard enough on the regular size Guardian, so it's going to be even more fun on the small. We're going to find the center of the top and attach the side panel. Just a quick little baste at the seam. Make sure your lining is moved out of the way. Repeating that on the other side. Fold the lining out of the way. I still want to keep the webbing excess hanging out over there. In that seam. It's just going to help keep everything from fraying. So now we've got these little flappy boys. We have our center held together, and we're going to line up the side over here. And if you want to, you could potentially just finish off the sides and the bottom with binding, but I think it would be a little thick. Okay. So you're going to start on that side and then fold the other side. And it's up to you how you want to try to tackle this, with either the side panel flat or the side panel in the round. It's your choice. I have done both ways, and I really can't say which is better. I am going to use a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Could probably even get away with a 1/4, but you would have wanted to do a 1/4 the entire time. So we're sewing right next to the stabilizer, and we're getting close to the top of the side panel, which is where things get kind of tricky. And we're just going to slowly fold all that together. That basting stitch at the top helps the side panel from shifting. And as we come back down, just go slow, do a couple stitches at a time, rearrange, press the layers back together, making sure your side panel exterior and the exterior front panel stay together. And then as you sew down this side, make sure you're folding your lining out of the way. Cannot tell you how many times I've caught my lining as I'm top stitching this, and I get so mad because you gotta undo it all. And then just make sure that you caught all the layers and you've sewn past any basting stitches. And then if you want to flip it right side out, you can. And then if you're going to trim anything, I really wouldn't trim your webbing down too much, but you could trim the vinyl away a little bit at that top side panel. And then you only have to do that 3 more times. And so what I like to do is clip my lining over to the side before I even start to line these up. Oh. I love it when we start running out of pieces. All right, we're starting on the side that has the side panel, so just make sure you're checking underneath and that your side panel lining is out of the way, or the back panel. Just make sure the lining pieces are out of the way. We're reaching the top of the curve, so I'm pushing into that curve to make sure the edges stay aligned, and then I'm just slowly rotating around. I recommend not over interfacing, or this is going to be even harder to do. So there is the exterior finish, and now we can do the lining. And if you prefer to start with the lining, you can absolutely do that. I feel like the lining is where I like to do side panel to the machine. And it's really tight right here, so if you don't have a machine with like a small workspace foot or a thinner foot, it's going to be a little tricky. You can also use staples to help you hold all this together, because when you start to sew it, it may shift a bit just as you're working your way around all that bulk. And I'm bunching up the exterior fabric as I sew the lining, which is again why you don't want to over interface. And then just make sure that your linings stay centered at the top. Leave your needle in to readjust. And then this side's much easier. And then I'm going to trim quite a bit away at the top center so that my side panels sit nicely. If you're worried about your lining being saggy, especially if you used a cotton woven, you can also press these together and then just do a quick basting stitch at the top of the side panel. Okay, we're almost to the easy part, which is adding the bottom and binding that on. Probably made like 25 or 30 guardians at this point, so if this isn't as easy for you as it is for me, just give yourself a little grace. Take breaks. You can do it. And if it helps you to maybe sew one side first or even baste it on, you can do that too. I think I'm going to start at the top center here and work my way down and then come back up the other side. So I've got the side panel flat against my machine. I'm starting at the top center. I'm going to start with the really hard side. And just go slow down that. And then work my way down the other side. Or I should say up the other side. And now I don't have to worry about it coming unclipped as I sew this side together because it's already done. And even if you don't sew it all the way, you just baste it and then get that attached and sew the entire way around, you could do that too. And again, I'm folding the exterior out of the way, meeting up those stitches, and voila. Trimming the excess. Now we can turn it. I'm going to start with the exterior right side out so that we can baste the lining together. And then we'll flip it all with lining side out so that we can attach the bottom panel. Oh my gosh, it's so cute. Got some threads fraying up there, but I can fix it. All right. So you want to press everything together, line up your centers. And then we want to distribute a little bit of the bulk so that adding that bottom panel isn't a gruesome task. So we're going to open up, or you can even trim down the side seams a little bit, or maybe even nest them if you would prefer to do that. I think I'll nest. So you fold one in one direction and fold one in the other. And just try to be consistent so that it doesn't look weird in the end. Making sure that all of your centers are together. And I'm just clipping, and then we're going to do a base stitch all the way around the bottom. Flip it again, and then add the bottom panel, add our binding, finish our straps. Okay, so everything is together. And then it's at this point, if any of the bottom of your bag is uneven, I'll just kind of trim it to match. I always have a little discrepancy with my zipper tabs. And so you can trim it so it's straight. So tiny. All right, so we'll unzip it, and we're gonna flip it lining side out. And then as we attach the bottom panel, we're gonna start by basting in place with our center points. Maybe like 4 inches across the front bottom panel, just at 1/8 of an inch or so. And then repeat that on the back of the bag. Find that center, line that up. Base that in place. Couple inches away from the center mark, and that just helps prevent shifting as you add the bottom with all the curves. So we'll line up the other center line, and it's up to you if you want to try this with the bottom panel touching your machine, or if you want to try to sew it in the round with your exterior touching the machine. Just clipping this in place. And then we're going to sew this at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then when I add the binding, I'm going to attach it with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And we've already got it basted nicely. And then I'm going to use my screwdriver to help me push the bottom panel to be lined up with the edges of the exterior. And I'm pushing the bag as we sew it. Leave your needle in to readjust. We're past the curve and we're on a straight side, so I don't have to be as stressed about attaching the curve. And now we're approaching the curve and I'm pushing into the bottom panel with the screwdriver so it stays aligned. And then I'm using this hand up here to kind of lower and push those layers together. Through the curve, flatten that back out. Come back down. Approaching another curve, I'm pushing into the corner with a screwdriver so that all those layers stay lined up. Readjusting. And making sure your center snips are lined up. And we're at the last curve. You might be tired, but don't give up. And then you can reach inside at any point to make sure your layers are sitting flat as well. And we did it. Bottom panel is attached. I have this little piece here that isn't quite even, so I'm just going to trim that away. And then we'll grab a little piece of binding. We're going to wrap this around. Ooh, it's the perfect amount. I like to use, this is a waterproof binding that I carry on my website. It's like a thicker grosgrain ribbon. I'll use that and 3/4 inch wide double-sided tape. And that'll help stick it in place. So I'm just placing the tape in the center. Make sure the tape is nice and pressed in place. And we're going to be folding this around, lining up the center, and then just pinching and wrapping that around the edge. And then for the corner, you want to pull and pinch and kind of stretch it just a little bit so there aren't as many bunchy creases. Some people like to use fold over elastic for this, or just a piece of waterproof canvas. Waterproof canvas can kind of fray over time, so you want to be careful doing that. I used to use it thinking it would be fine, but it can fray over time. So I'm flattening it over the seam there, and now I'm at a corner. So I'm going to pull, wrap, and pinch to cover that. And I don't untape the binding all at once. I just do a little bit at a time. Otherwise, you've got a big sticky mess. That's no fun. That's what she said. All right, so the short end of the binding can fray, so you can use a lighter to prevent it from fraying. You can also fold it over. And that is that. And I'm going to add this woven label, I think on this side, on the bottom. And now we're going to sew that on with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So I do have a seam guide plate, and that's where I'm able to line up the edge that I'm sewing. And I'm still using a screwdriver to help me press the edge of the binding where I need it to be and just help me through the corners. And if your binding doesn't quite look perfect, just give yourself grace. It is difficult to do, but it's also at the bottom of your bag. It's going to be covered with stuff. So as long as it's sewn on all the way, it's fine. So now we can turn this and start kind of reshaping the bag and finish up the straps. I'm going to press into the seam of the bottom, making sure everything sits nicely. Okay. So I've got 1-inch snap hooks. I'm going to try to use these locking slide adjusters, see if I can get it to work. We'll see. I don't have any slim 1-inch slide adjusters, and if you use like wide mouth or anything like that, your webbing's going to slip and slide. I'm also going to use a little scrap piece over the end, the raw end of my webbing, so it doesn't fray over time either. I'm going to sew these on as well. So I'll pull the threads and tie them off soon. I'm just gonna kind of try this. So we want to add, I wonder if I should have already added this or not. I should be able to do this. Actually, I think I'm gonna go just on the outside, leaving the center open. Let's see what that looks like. Looks a little funky. Because if I go around just here, then I can't get back to it. If I go around just there. So this is the only way that makes sense. We'll just see. So I'm opening that up and going up and back around. And then before I do the other one, I'm just gonna clip this and see how it feels. And then we'll also have to add our little connector piece of vinyl to keep it safe, but it definitely looks nice. And it does feel somewhat secure as well. But the most beneficial parts are the grippy teeth spots. So if you were going to do this, I would say you would want to use a square ring down here and 2 pieces of webbing with this attached only to the top half. Like this, and then your other piece of webbing would come up around the back and then through the front, and then it can grip onto those pieces. Yeah, I think that looks nice. And then just make sure you're keeping the orientation of those sliders the same on both sides. It's kind of hard to know which way is front and back. We're just looping around the center of the slider. So I'm going to cut my vinyl to 1 by 3 times 2. And the vinyl that I'm using, I believe I purchased from Bodio. They have some really fun, unique vinyls, pretty cheap if you're just starting out, things like that. So I'm adding some tape to these so that I can wrap them around the webbing, and then we'll sew the connector on. And that's also going to add a little bit of grip to your slide adjusters so that your straps aren't slipping and sliding. Goodbye. And then when you are sewing this in place, make sure you're only sewing the 2 pieces of vinyl that are closest to the inside edge of your slide adjuster. So if you have to, you can pinch them together and just make sure that your strap still moves. If you do not want to sew this together, you could also add some rivets. And then again, make sure your strap still slides. Okay. And there is our mini Guardian all finished. He's so cute. It's so little. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I would love to see if you make a mini Guardian, and I'll see y'all later.